Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
You are listening to the Brilliance Business Show. I am your host, Mark Stephen Pooler. Conversations with leading experts in business. Today, I have the most incredible guest, Adam Cox. Adam is an Harley Street hypnotherapist, international speaker, and a phobia expert. Our topic today is removing phobias in one session. Adam, welcome to the Brilliance Business Show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Before we get started, I will just make a little disclaimer that you are not offering legal advice or legal assistance. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Adam?
Yeah, totally. I'm a hypnotherapist and phobia expert, certainly not a lawyer, so I'll be offering zero legal advice in any way, shape or form.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing your wisdom and business knowledge today. Let's get started with the show. Adam, can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and your business and removing phobias in one session?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm known as the Phobia Guru. This was a name that was given to me by clients. Some of my early clients said, you're an absolute kind of expert at this, you're like a phobia guru. And then the media started calling me a phobia guru. And in essence, it's not that I'm, meditative or anything like that. It was just because I was known for being able to eliminate phobias in a single session. So the media called me the Phobia Guru, and I work in Harley Street. I also have a practice in Hertfordshire as well. Work with people across the world, do workshops with large amounts of people. So over the last years, I've literally cured hundreds of people of their phobias. So that's essentially what I do.
And in such a short space of time too, Adam, and in one session, that's a real great thing to be able to do for people who are suffering with these phobias.
It is, and I think most people believe that change takes a long time, particularly psychological change. But the thing is, phobias are created very quickly, sometimes in a moment. So why would something that was created in a moment, why would it be useful to take years to change that? It needs to change in a moment also. So the way that I work with clients is to look at how the phobia was created and then how that phobia is manifested in terms of anxiety and a behavioral response, and then essentially rewire it, reflow it into a different direction so it never quite reaches that panic or anxiety and instead goes somewhere else, somewhere more useful.
And who are your typical clients, Adam?
It was really anyone with a phobia. And there are lots of people out there with phobias. Most people with a phobia tend to handle that phobia by pretending they don't have it or just avoiding the things that cause it. So anyone with a phobia is a potential client. More importantly, it's anyone with a phobia that is motivated enough to no longer have that phobia anymore. And normally it takes something for that to happen. For example, if you are offered a promotion and you are worried that by taking that promotion you would have to speak in front of large audiences, that might be a trigger for you to seek additional help. Or it might be that a family member has moved to a different part of the world and then you need to take long flights in order to see them. So from that perspective, it then becomes hugely desirable for you to be able to fly without having crippling anxiety. So it's not just those people with phobias, but those people with phobias that have made the decision that they don't want them anymore and they want expert help to get rid of that phobia.
That's a great point, Adam. And I like how you've mentioned if someone wants a promotion and then they have to deliver a speech and they're scared of speaking, that would drive them to come and seek you out. I really like that example. Do you recall a specific ha-ha moment that led to the launch of your business?
I think looking back on it now, it was clear that a period in my life which was very distressing was in my first year of university. And in that first year of university, a few things happened in quick succession, which basically meant that I became very anxious around people. So rather than the first year of university being a very, social, fun time, instead, it was, a time when I had very severe anxiety. And unfortunately, those anxieties spread into other areas of my life. And I became a bit of a recluse. I wouldn't really see anyone, talk to anyone, and it was down to the anxiety. And now when I look back, because I know all the symptoms to look out for, it was clear that I had social anxiety disorder. It was clear that I had general anxiety disorder. I also had additional other fears, phobias. So I had a fear of heights, had a fear of public speaking. And at one point, I couldn't leave the flat that I was in without my heart rate, rising. And I had a heart rate monitor. I could see what was happening, going at, to about 120, 130, which when you're not exercising is hard to do. Just at the thought or the attempt to open my door to my flat, the idea of leaving, that became, crippling. And that's obviously a form of agoraphobia. So looking back now, it was clear that this, brand that I have, Phobia Guru, came from me trying to fix these problems in myself. I had this kind of awful situation where I was thinking of the future, thinking, well, how can I be successful in business when I can't even leave my flat? How can I be, an influencer, a public speaker, when, I can't even speak to an audience of 3 people. So it forced me to go on a journey, and that journey then meant that I had to learn how all the experts in the world had cured phobias and fears and these anxieties very quickly, and I became my first client. So looking back now, that was clearly what was happening. At the time, it didn't feel that way. I just felt out of sheer desperation that I needed to fix myself. So I would say that looking back is the aha moment. And I would say there's been other aha moments kind of along the journey, but I mean, in essence, I was my first client, and it was by doing what I did to myself that it gave me the belief that perhaps I could do it for other people.
What I really like about that, Adam, the adversity and challenges you faced really motivated you to, one, look after yourself, and then that led to you helping so many people with phobias, and that led to you then seeking that out as a profession. You're walking the walk, talking the talk, and it's because you have been through that yourself. I really like that, Adam.
Well, I think it's one of the things, one of my core values is congruency, as you say, walking the talk. And I think too many therapists and coaches, they're regurgitating other people's experiences, other people's, kind of philosophies. And they're not actually evidence. There's a great saying, be the change that you want to see in the world. And very few people actually do that. So when the media started calling me the Phobia Guru, I had to deep down ask myself, was I willing to embrace this brand? And I couldn't to begin with, because I had one irrational fear left. I'd got through a fear of public speaking. I got through my social anxiety disorder. I'd achieved so much, but I had one irrational fear left. And it was the idea of doing stand-up comedy, the idea of standing on a stage, particularly for me that had a fear of public speaking and a fear of being judged by people. I was then thinking, well, look, stand-up comedy, that's being evaluated in a room full of strangers, with, and you're vying for their attention, and you're essentially saying, look, I'm funny, pay attention to me. So that terrified me. And I thought, well, look, if that terrifies me, that's an anxiety, that's an irrational fear, because nothing physically harmful can happen to you in that situation. Emotionally it can, but not physically. So I thought, for me to actually take ownership of this brand, Phobia Guru, I now need to face this fear. So I went on a 6-week course and then essentially learned the very basics of stand-up comedy. And then, I did a gig in an East End pub owned by a comedian, and there was 100 people in the audience. And it was very nerve-wracking. Even with the skills that I have, it was very nerve-wracking. But I kept persisting until, now I've done more than 30 stand-up comedy gigs, and there's just zero fear. So I'm a big, big fan of walking my talk. And I encourage people to challenge me. I like it when people, question my credentials, because, I'm very confident in where I've come from and how bad my anxiety used to be and how genuine my fears were. And now, I'm a very different person.
Well, that's a very real fear to a lot of people. One, getting up and speaking in public, and two, comedy, the fear of no one laughing at your jokes. But it's all in the mind. I suppose we build things up and things up, and it's always worse in the mind. Once we face those fears, it's never as bad as what we've imagined. Is that right, Adam?
No, totally is. And as humans, we fear being left out of the tribe. We fear that kind of element of, being ostracized or exiled. And that's why that element of being judged in a public environment is so terrifying for people. In stand-up comedy, yes, and that's an exaggerated form of public speaking. In public speaking, you're saying that I'm an expert, I've got something interesting to say. You're just saying I've got something funny to say with stand-up comedy, and it is it's a very real fear. It's a very natural fear, but at the same time, fear is subjective. And one of the clues for me as to how to deal with fear is that you realize that whenever you get outside of your comfort zone, it feels anxious because you're uncomfortable. But the longer you spend outside of your comfort zone, the more comfortable you feel in an uncomfortable situation, until what was uncomfortable suddenly becomes something that is comfortable. And last summer, in fact, I hadn't done any stand-up comedy for a year. And I thought, I wonder if it's come back. I wonder if the fears have come back. So I did another gig, not because I want to be a comedian, but just to check that the fears had gone for good. And you're right, it is all in the head. But at the same time, although the fear may be subjective, the symptoms and the feelings, that's real. You can't pretend to have a raised heart rate. You can't pretend to fill your blood full of adrenaline and cortisol. You can't pretend to, start rapid breathing and having that panic reaction. That's really real. So anyone listening that has these anxieties, even if the fear feels irrational and feels a bit silly, I've been there. I know that the feeling is real, even if the fears may be, somehow silly from a particular perspective.
You couldn't have said that any better, Adam. And what I'm taking from that, the magic happens outside of the comfort zone. And the more time you spend outside the comfort zone, the easier it gets. What really motivates you to jump out of bed every morning?
Well, I'd be lying if it was every morning. I have kind of bad days, like anyone has bad days. But knowing how bad it was for me with my phobias, my fears, my anxieties, and knowing that I now have a certain skill set that means that I can take someone with a lifelong fear and eliminate that phobia, that fear in a single session, that motivates me to make a difference in other people's lives. And once you've changed a few lives, that becomes very addictive, because you become restless, you become almost obsessive. You start thinking, well, look, if I can just make the difference of one life today, then it's my duty to go out there and do that. So it comes from a place of feeling that my gift and my skills could genuinely help make a difference, and to find those people that really have that problem to which I can help.
And it's a great gift what you are doing, Adam, and it's great that it's coming from a place of helping others. What sets your business apart, and what unique need are you filling for your clients?
Well, as I said before, most people deal with fears and phobias by avoiding them. Unfortunately, fears amplify and spread when they are not challenged. If you assume that, let's say every person over 6 foot is, violent, for example, and you just avoid anyone over 6 foot, you're never going to meet anyone over 6 foot to prove that they're friendly. So therefore, those fears get bigger and bigger in your head, and until the very sight of seeing someone, very far away will have you running away. So you need to encounter the fear at some extent to eliminate the fears. After avoidance, the next way that people deal with their phobias and fears is self-medication, normally with alcohol, drugs, or food. And sometimes they'll even see a GP, their local doctor. They'll explain the symptoms of panic or severe anxiety, and then the GP will prescribe them things like beta blockers or antidepressants or even ADHD drugs and things like that, all with horrible side effects that don't deal with the problem, by the way, that simply manage the symptoms. And therefore, it doesn't actually help. It's a coping, it's a pharmaceutical coping mechanism rather than actually taking away what's causing these anxieties. And it's not very good. My approach is that in a single session, through talking and encouraging people to think about their fear in a different way, I can then rewire that pattern. So the very thought of the thing that used to cause fear and anxiety then causes something else. And it doesn't need to be that they feel amazing. For someone with crippling anxiety, simply feeling bored or ambivalence feels like paradise if before that you've been experiencing panic at the very thought of the same thing. So it doesn't have to have people jumping for joy every time they see a spider or a dog or think of public speaking. Simply not being bothered by it is a good outcome.
It certainly is, and just being able to control that phobia and not having the heartbeat go up and feeling that little bit more relaxed. Any progress is progress, Adam.
No, it totally is, and the thing is, most people don't believe, because the thing is, if you've had a phobia, you've had it for your whole life, and you've tried lots of things to get rid of it. And one of the ways in which people try to get rid of it themselves is by telling them that it's silly, that it's an irrational fear. But that doesn't help. So then they develop this belief system of, well, I've had this for so long, so the idea that it could simply go away in about an hour isn't possible. Now, the problem with that is that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then, even if they hear about me, their belief system will have them thinking, oh, right, well, that's not possible. I can't believe that's possible. That sounds too good to be true. Their belief system won't allow them to even entertain it. And that's why, on my website, I've got more than 100 testimonials of people that used to have a phobia, severe phobia, and now don't have it anymore, because it requires that many, testimonials, that amount of evidence. And then people start thinking, maybe it is possible, and that's really my mission, is to educate and inspire people that you can get rid of phobias super quick and you don't need to have them anymore.
You couldn't have said that any better, and what you believe you can achieve. Why is your service especially important in today's modern world?
Well, I think in modern world we are surrounded by things that can cause anxiety. There's more opportunities than ever before, but there's also more triggers out there. And and also we live faster lives, so therefore anything that can get in the way of us being successful becomes a really detrimental barrier. So whereas before, I would say, let's say 2-3 generations ago, you could get by being reasonably good at one particular skill, and then that just becomes your career, your profession. These days, you need to be proficient in lots of different areas. You need to be a good influencer. You might need to be, able to speak in public, even if that's not your core business. You might need to travel around the world to showcase your product or your brand. So therefore, there's more pressures on people to do more than they've ever done before. But if you've got a phobia or an anxiety that stops you doing that, that could be really detrimental. That can stop you progressing. That can stop you growing your business. Or it could just be embarrassing. Several of my clients have the kind of phobias that they feel silly about. And in fact, one guy, he was 6'3", scared of mice. And he, obviously I'd never reveal names or anything like that, strict confidentiality. But he says, you know what, I'm a big bloke, and I play rugby and I do this, and I just feel so ridiculous that I've got this kind of reaction to mice. And he said, I can't tell anyone, because if they find out, they're going to make my life a misery. And the thing is, for people that don't have phobias, they're funny. They're hilarious. Except for the person that actually experiences them, and that's something that is something that they need to know they don't need to have. These phobias can be eliminated, and they can be eliminated quickly.
You've made some great points there, Adam, and I wouldn't be very keen on mice. I wouldn't say I have a phobia for them, but I wouldn't want to be on the television on I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, having them run over me or things like that. But I do understand what you're saying about people having phobias that people find funny. I once had a friend that was scared of fruit, and I remember I was a lot younger then, and I had a tangerine and chased her with it, and it was a very, very real phobia. And sometimes people don't understand how scared that person may be because of the thing they're scared they have a phobia for.
No, you're right, and these things. I mean, I don't particularly like ketchup. I'll be honest with you. I don't have a phobia of it. But the moment my kids found out that I don't like ketchup, they thought it was hilarious to just kind of, move their plate towards me and see my reaction. So it's a very natural thing to do when people learn that we don't like or we fear certain things to kind of, test it's real. And it comes from a lack of, they don't believe that someone could have this experience. So your friend that has a fear of fruit, for example, it's unlikely that it's the fruit itself. It's normally the texture of the skin. So certain materials like, citrus fruit, for example, has lots of tiny little, kind of curves, almost like a texture to it. And there's a phobia called trypophobia, which is where you have clusters of holes together. So for a lot of people that have a fear of certain textures, for example, it comes from that root. It comes from that same kind of place of it being, and it's not really fear, it's more that it unnerves people. It makes them feel a bit like their skin's crawling and things like that. But it's still an unpleasant sensation. So the key thing is, back then when you were a child, you just thought it was hilarious because you didn't feel that way, but they did. So chasing them around with a bit of fruit feels hilarious, except for that person that you were chasing around, you've found a trigger of something that causes them to feel something unpleasant, and what's funny to you is traumatic for them. And that tends to be one of the reasons that people seek me out, because they don't want to feel this trauma, this unpleasant feelings anymore, and enough's enough. They're going to find a way to fix it, come what may.
I'm a lot older now and wiser, so I promise not to do that again. Can you share more details on the kind of service and products you offer?
Yeah, so what I'm famous for is my single session phobia cures. I eliminate phobias in a single session. Mainly that's from Harley Street, but I also work with people all over the world. I've worked with people in recently Toronto in Canada, Abu Dhabi, Orkney Islands up in northern Scotland, and also Miami recently. And it's because although I'm famous as the UK's leading expert, if you go onto Google and you put phobia expert, I come up number one, and that's globally, not just even in the UK. So although I say I'm the UK's leading phobia expert, I think within the next year or two I could be the world's leading phobia expert. So that's forced me to do things other than just single session of therapy, because not everyone can come and see me in Harley Street. So I do sessions by Skype and FaceTime. I also have an online course which has all of my most effective techniques in audio download form, and plus almost like an introductory explainer video as well. So it's a combination of video content and audio content that means that people can work with almost like a remote version of me. They get access to all of my content and kind of techniques without having to work with me physically, because not everyone can afford to work with me. So I have this kind of other way, this online course that still gives people a similar experience but at a lower cost, because it doesn't actually take my time, if that makes sense.
And I would imagine you have all sorts of client success stories. What's one that really stands out in your mind?
Yeah, I would say, it would be very easy for me to, kind of say, oh, right, it's, this celebrity or kind of that case. But actually, for me, it's the impact that kind of comes to mind. And there was a lady called Lisa, and when she was a child, similar kind of story to your story with the fruit. When she was a child, her older brother used to trap her in the corner of a room with his hands cupped, so she couldn't see what was in it. And half the time it would be empty, and half the time there'd be a spider in there. But of course, she wouldn't know which it was, so she would be freaking out at the idea of a spider, that a spider could be, in his hands. And that's pretty bad. That's enough to cause a fairly strong phobia. But it got worse than that. This is her older brother, I think she was like 6 or 7, maybe he was like 9 or 10. He spent a whole Saturday collecting what was probably about 200 spiders, put them in a jar, and then just before she went to bed, he then lifted up her duvet and then emptied the jar of spiders into her bed. He took a whole day to collect all these spiders, delicately put the duvet back, and then she goes off to bed. Now, the problem is, when she went into her room, she wasn't expecting there to be spiders in there. So she lifts it up, not expecting anything, and then suddenly sees hundreds of crawling spiders, which was something that created, a horrible experience. Now, I know phobics, and I know that some of the triggers are movement, proximity, and quantity. So if it was just one spider that close, it would have freaked her out. 200, that had her on that was a very traumatic experience. So she had that phobia from the age of about, 6 or 7. Throughout her whole kind of life, and I worked with her when she was in her mid-40s, and not only had she had this severe, very crippling fear of spiders, arachnophobia, her whole life, but her child, who was I think 13 or so when he came to the course with her, was also an arachnophobe, because he had learned it from his mum. And within, literally just over an hour and a half, 2 hours, as part of a phobia course, she went from having level 10 fear of spiders to it being completely diminished. And she couldn't believe it. She's now almost an advocate for me. She'll constantly tell other people that how much her life's changed, and I think that was a really proud moment for me. It was a client that really made me think, wow, it didn't just affect her life, but it also affected her son's life, and it also enabled her to battle a demon because by something unintentionally, I'm sure, just as you thought you were having fun chasing that, that friend of yours down around with the fruit, her brother probably thought it was hilarious because he didn't have the fear, not realizing how painful and how traumatic that was, not just in the moment, but for years and years after. So it gave her closure on that and meant that she was able to kind of banish a few demons. And I think for me, although I've worked with some incredible people and very famous people, that's the story that really sticks out for me as something that makes me feel very proud of the skills that I have.
That is a great success story, and I don't feel half as bad now for chasing my friend round with a tangerine, but I don't think I would have been happy about that. I think that would have been enough to give me a phobia too. Adam, how do clients typically hear about you, and are there certain life moments that usually lead them to seeking you out?
Yes, people typically find me on Google. Like I say, if you put phobia expert in Google, I'm the first name that comes up. The media, I'm always featured in radio, TV, magazines, you name it, newspapers. I'm always there. So sometimes people hear about me from that. A lot of people, just I've worked with hundreds of phobics now. It's word of mouth. So someone will say, "Oh, I used to have this phobia, I don't anymore." Whenever they see someone with a phobia. So that's typically how people find out about me. And the key trigger really for people to seek me out is that something changes in their life. I remember one time, actually, we were talking about spiders and spider phobia. There was a lady, and she was fine avoiding spiders. That was her way of coping with her fear. Except one time she was driving on a motorway, at the speed limit, and then suddenly a spider came down from the mirror, central mirror in the car. Now, if you have a phobia, you know that your response is not proportionate and it is not rational. It is extreme, and those feelings that you have in terms of breathing rate and narrowing your focus on that very thing that you fear. Well, if you're traveling at 70 miles an hour and you're looking at a spider, you're not looking at the road, and if your heart is beating at 120, 130 beats per minute, you're not making good choices. Her words to me is, how I didn't kill someone or kill myself, I have no idea. She managed to get, to the hard shoulder, pull over, having a panic attack and all that kind of stuff. It tends to be things like that where avoidance doesn't work anymore. There was another client that I worked with, and he had a fear of public transport. Being on one stop on a tube absolutely freaked him out. But then he changed jobs, and his job then required him to travel further. Now, he was managing that by what should have been a very short underground journey. He was taking a boat down the Thames all the way to Greenwich, and it should have been like a 10-15 minute journey. It was taking him 45 minutes in each direction because he was avoiding the underground. He said, "Right, enough's enough." And he went from having a crippling fear, couldn't even be on the tube for one stop. And very recently, and if you look on Just Giving and you search for this, you'll find it. He did a challenge where he went on every tube line for a day, raise money for a charity. And I said to him before he took that challenge, I said, "Look, success is not going to be what you expect it to be. You think it's going to be this feeling of elation that you're on the tube with a big smile on your face." And I said, "It won't be. Success is going to be when you're on the underground, bored, thinking, I've got hours of this left." Because I said, look, the idea that you can go from being absolutely panicked on the underground to being bored, that's going to be your breakthrough moment. And he did it. He spent, a whole day on the underground doing this challenge, raising money for a good cause. But that's what I tend to do. I get people not just, removing their phobia, but smashing it, getting them doing things that prove that the fear is gone. And that lady, by the way, that had the brother that, kind of scared her, she arrived, couldn't even be in the same room as a spider. within a couple of hours, she'd captured and released a house spider. She'd held a house spider, and she'd held a massive tarantula. We're talking like the size of an adult hand. That size of a spider. That's how dramatic the change can be.
Such great success stories, and it really makes me see why you're so passionate about what you do, because those kind of results you're getting for people, that must give you so much satisfaction. I think you're doing amazing work. Is there anything we did not cover, Adam, that you would like to share?
No, I don't think so. I think if anyone has got a fear, anxiety, or phobia that you just don't want anymore, I would say, go on Google, put phobia expert. My name will come up pretty quick, or you can go to phobiaguru.com. The key thing I would say is that there's something powerful about breaking through a fear, because fears become limitations. Back when I was a teenager, I'd created my own prison. I didn't realize it. But all these fears that weren't real, but the symptoms were, meant that avoidance meant that I was living in my own prison, and I didn't realize. But each fear that I broke through, each phobia that I broke through, knocked down a wall of that prison. And now, honestly, I look at the world in a very different way, because even if there are barriers in the way, even if there are fears that make me think, I don't know how to do that, my attitude now is that I'll simply find a way, because I look at all fears as temporary, and I don't question whether or not they can be removed, simply whether or not it's useful to keep them, because there are some fears that it's useful to keep. I wouldn't want my children running around traffic, for example. So certain fears are useful, but there's a lot of fears that the media, society, our culture, encourages us to have, that simply aren't useful and will get in the way of your success. So if fear, anxiety, or phobias are getting in the way of you living the life that you want to live, then seek me out and we can have a chat. And I also do free 30-minute consultations over the phone. So even if you're not sure, having a free call with me might be a good idea, just to explore if this is something that I can help with.
Thank Adam for being my guest today on the Brilliance Business Show. Can you just share once more how people can connect with you, the best way for them to reach out?
Totally. So go to Google, put Phobia Expert in, or just go straight into the browser and put phobiaguru.com, and you'll find my details.
Thank you so much for being my guest today. Today, I have been talking to Adam Cox, Harley Street hypnotherapist, international speaker, phobia expert. Our topic has been removing phobias in one session. You have been listening to the Brilliance Business Show with your host, Mark Stephen Pooler. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.